Imagine waiting for something for decades without any guarantee that it will happen. Now imagine that this wait involves an impossible dream to human eyes. That was Sarah's way, a woman who left Mesopotamia with her husband Abraham to follow a divine promise even without knowing where she was going. Sarah's trajectory is marked by ups and downs, moments of faith and episodes of doubt. She faced infertility, disappointment, and even life risks, but in the end her story became a powerful symbol of perseverance and trust in God. How could one who laughed at the promise of a child in old age become an example of faith for Judaism and Christianity? If you have already doubted your own way, this study about Sarah can bring valuable answers. Let's dive into this inspiring journey, understand your challenges, and learn how your transformation can impact our lives to this day. Not only did Sarah accompany Abraham on her journey, she gave up all the security she knew. Leaving Ur of Chaldeus, one of the most prosperous cities of Mesopotamia, she went towards an uncertain future, only with God's promise. Canaan would be the land of the promise, but the way was full of challenges. Sarah's faith was tested from the beginning, as she left behind the family, culture, and any sense of stability to trust the divine covenant. The years passed and the long-awaited maternity did not arrive. Sarah dealt with the weight of infertility at a time when having children was synonymous with honor and continuity. The promises to Abraham seemed impossible and doubt began to arise. How could an advanced woman generate a child? Hope ranged from faith and despair, but God still had surprising plans for it. At 90, when any human logic would say it was too late, the miracle happened. Isaac was born, proving that God's promises are fulfilled at the right time. Sarah's journey teaches us that faith does not mean absence of questions, but to trust that even when we do not see the way, God has already prepared the answer. Its story remains a powerful reminder that nothing is impossible for those who believe. Sarah was not always called that. Its original name was Sarai, a Hebrew word whose meaning arouses different interpretations. Some scholars suggest that Sarai means my princess, highlighting a more personal bond, perhaps limited to her clan or family. Others point to a possible connection with Mesopotamian idolatry, as the name may be linked to the worship of the moon god, a common practice in the Chaldeans. The move to Sarah came directly from God. At a crucial moment, he moved Abram's name to Abraham and Sarai to Sarah, establishing a new identity for both. The new name means princess, but now in a broader way, representing her position within the divine plane. Sarah was not just Abraham's wife, but a matriarch of faith, designed to be the mother of nations and leave a legacy that would extend for generations. This name change symbolizes a fresh start and a larger call. God not only changes names in the Bible but transforms destinations. Like Sarah, we often need to abandon limiting identities to assume who we were really created to be. What today in your life needs to be redefined to align with God's promise? Sarah was not only Abraham's wife, but also her half-sister. Both were children of will but of different mothers, something that may seem uncommon today, but it was acceptable at the time. This practice was common among the ancient peoples of Mesopotamia, especially among noble families, as a way to preserve lineage and succession rights. However, this proximity also generated challenges, especially when Abraham had to hide his relationship with Sarah to protect himself. Sarah's lineage is essential within Judaism, Christianity, and even Islam, for Isaac came, the son of the promise, whose descent would give rise to the people of Israel. The impact of its inheritance is not limited to blood ties, but extends to the spiritual field. In the New Testament, Hebrews and Christians see Sarah as an example of faith, showing that true heritage is not only in genealogy, but in obedience to God. Sarah's story reminds us that our origin does not define our destiny. Even though he came from a land marked by idolatry, God chose her to something greater. Like her, anyone can break with past limitations and enter a new purpose. What have you been carrying from your story that may need to be delivered so something new starts? Sarah and Abraham's journey was not a simple change of city, he was a jump in the unknown. They left Ur of the Chaldeans, one of the most advanced metropolises of the time, to follow God's call to Canaan. The divine promise spoke of a land that his descendants would inherit, but the way was full of challenges. Upon arriving, they faced a period of severe hunger, forcing them to seek shelter in Egypt, where a new problem arose. Sarah was a remarkable beauty woman, and upon entering Egypt, Pharaoh wished her to her harem. Fearing for his own life, Abraham omitted that she was his wife, saying that he was only his sister. This led Sarah to be taken to the Pharaoh palace until God intervened, sending pests to protect his promise. The Egyptian ruler, realizing the truth, returned Sarah Abraham and expelled them from Egypt. But this would not be the last time this kind of situation would happen. Later, Sarah underwent a similar experience with King Abimelech. Again, Abraham introduced Sarah as a sister, and the king tried to take her as a wife. However, God intervened once again in a dream, warning Abimelech about the mistake he was about to make. These episodes show that even in the face of questionable difficulties and decisions, God remained faithful to his promise, protecting Sarah and his purpose. Sarah lived moments when her safety was a threat. Twice, her own husband, Abraham, decided to hide her true identity to protect her life. In Egypt, fearing that her beauty aroused Pharaoh's greed, he said she was just her sister. This resulted in Sarah being taken to the royal palace, but God intervened, sending pests over the house of the Egyptian ruler, forcing him to return it. This episode could have been very bad, but it showed that God takes care of yours, even when they make a mistake. The same mistake was repeated years later, this time with King Abimelech of generating. Once again, Abraham opted for half-truth, saying that Sarah was her sister and the king took her to him. But God intervened again, warning Abimelech in a dream that Sarah was the wife of a chosen man. The king immediately returned her and rebuked Abraham for his lack of transparency. Sarah's story shows how, even in situations of mistake and fear, divine protection never fails. But these situations also teach something important: faith is not always constant. Abraham was an unshakable man of faith, but in times of danger he resorted to human devices to protect himself. How many times do we also let fear lead us to impulsive decisions? Sarah's story challenges us to trust more, even when circumstances seem threatening. Have we truly entrusted that God keeps us, or do we try to make a way in difficult situations? Sarah's infertility was not just a personal issue, but a great social and emotional weight. At that time, a childless woman was seen as someone without purpose, with no future. To make matters worse, God had promised Abraham that he would be the father of a great nation, but the years passed and Sarah was still without pregnant. God's silence seemed to contradict her promise, and this led her to make a drastic decision. In an attempt to help in fulfilling the promise, Sarah offered her Hagar servant to Abraham, a common practice in Mesopotamia. The son generated from this union, Ishmael, seemed to be the solution to the dilemma. But soon Sarah realized that this decision would generate a deep conflict. When Hagar became pregnant, he began to despise her, and the relationship between them became unsustainable. Sarah, consumed by jealousy and frustration, demanded that Hagar and Ishmael be expelled. This episode shows how often we want to accelerate God's plans with our own solutions. But human shortcuts are not always the right way. Sarah learned in the difficult way that God's time is different from ours. How many times have we despaired and tried to solve things our way? Her story teaches us that waiting can be difficult, but the promise always comes at the right time. The promise seemed impossible. Sarah was already 90 years old, far beyond the fertile age, when he heard God say she would have a son. Your reaction? She laughed. After all, how could something so out of human logic happen? Even Abraham, 100 years old, was surprised. But God reaffirmed Isaac would come. His name even means he laughs, an eternal reminder of how Sarah doubted at the beginning, but then witnessed the impossible to happen. And so, against all the probabilities, Sarah became pregnant and gave birth to Isaac, the son of the promise. This moment was not just a personal miracle, but confirmation of God's covenant with Abraham. Isaac represented the beginning of the offspring that would generate the 12 tribes of Israel, fulfilling a divine plan that would extend throughout the biblical history. Sarah, previously marked by infertility, became the mother of a great nation. This miracle teaches us that God does not depend on our limitations to fulfill what he has promised. Sarah's wait was long, but every detail was within God's perfect time. Sometimes promises seem distant and our faith falters, but their history reminds us that what God determines, no one can prevent. What have you considered impossible in your life? Is it like Sarah? Is it time to trust that the impossible is about to happen? Isaac's birth has not only brought joy, but also a great family conflict. Before him, Sarah had already allowed Hagar to generate a son to Abraham, and Ishmael grew up as the firstborn. But now, with the heir to the promise present, the tension has increased. The apex of the problem came when Sarah saw Ishmael mocking Isaac. For her, that was unacceptable and something needed to be done. Sarah demanded that Abraham expelled Hagar and Ishmael, ensuring that Isaac was the only one to inherit the promise. This may seem hard, but it made sense within the context of the time. According to the Mesopotamian laws, the son of a servant could be entitled to inheritance, which would put Isaac at risk. Even reluctantly, Abraham answered Sarah's request, but God did not abandon Hagar and Ishmael, promising that he would also become the father of a great nation. This episode raises profound questions about inheritance, identity, and destiny. We often want to hold control over what belongs to us, for fear of losing what God has given us. But Sarah's story teaches us that God's promise cannot be threatened by external circumstances. Have we trusted that God takes care of our future, or we still try to solve everything alone? Sarah lived a long and significant life, dying at 127. Interestingly, she is the only woman in the Bible whose age and death was recorded, a detail that highlights her importance. His departure marked a moment of great mourning for Abraham, who cried his loss and sought a worthy place to bury it. He bought Machpelah's cave in Hebron to be the tomb of Sarah, an act that also established an right over the earth that God had promised his descent. Even after his death, Sarah continued to be remembered as the matriarch of faith. Its name echoes not only in Jewish traditions but also in Christianity. The New Testament cites it as an example of a woman who, despite doubts and failures, trusted the divine promise. Its role was essential for the formation of the Hebrew people and God's plan for humanity, leaving a legacy that crosses generations. Sarah's story teaches us that the true impact of a life is not just what is achieved, but what is left to others. She started as an ordinary woman, full of uncertainties, but ended as a reference of faith. What do you want to leave as a legacy? How can your choices today influence those who will come after you? Sarah is not only an Old Testament figure, but also an essential reference in the New Testament. The Apostle Peter, for example, mentions it in 1 Peter 3:6, highlighting his submission and faith as an example for Christian women. Already in the book of Hebrews 11:11, she appears in the gallery of the heroes of faith, recognized as someone who considered faithful to him who had made her promise, proof that, despite her initial doubts, Sarah ended her journey trusting fully in God. The Apostle Paul also uses Sarah to illustrate the difference between law and grace. In Galatians 4:2231, he compares the children of Sarah and Hagar, representing Isaac as the son of promise and Ishmael as the son according to flesh. This teaching shows that the relationship with God is not based on human efforts, but to trust his grace. Sarah's story then is not just an old account, but a reflection of spiritual truths that continue to impact Christians to this day. Sarah transcends her time because her trajectory speaks directly to human challenges: waiting, trusting, and persevering, even when everything seems impossible. His name remains a symbol of faith, motherhood, and fulfillment of divine promises. Your life challenges us to reflect: in which promises of God do we need to learn to trust more? Sarah's story teaches us that faith does not mean no doubt, but continuing to trust even when everything seems impossible. She laughed at her promise, tried to resolve things with her own hands, faced family conflicts, and made questionable decisions. But in the end, God fulfilled everything he had said. His journey reminds us that God's time is perfect and that no human limitation can prevent his plan. Now look at your own life. Is there any promise you feel that is taking too long? Any dreams that seem unreachable? Sarah's story proves that the impossible happens when we learn to trust. What can we do today to strengthen our faith and wait with patience? Reflect on this and share your view of this amazing biblical character in the comments. If this content has made sense to you, be sure to subscribe to the channel and activate notifications to receive more inspiring studies like this. Let us together learn more about the great lessons of the Bible and how to apply them in our lives.